Hello and welcome back to the Delete This podcast. For today's episode, we're going to be talking about the Somali refugee controversy that you've seen plastered all over the news. And then we're going to talk about JD Vance. And JD Vance is a little bit of a alleged con artist, if you will, or maybe Nicki Minaj has better words for JD Vance.
Assassin JD Vance, our vice president.
Please stay tuned. Stay with us for this episode. We will be right back. Okay, first off, I want to give a huge shout out to the Delete This podcast team for helping us get this show to the stage that it's at this week. Obviously, I think that when we last spoke, I shared with you guys that I would be returning tomorrow, and then tomorrow night never ended up happening. So we're back in today. But I think that we have made a lot of improvements to the show. Hopefully, you guys are enjoying those accomplishments, but we'll see once this is actually posted whether or not that the show did improve or not. But we hope that it did. But anyways, like I was sharing with you guys, we are going to be talking today a little bit about the Somali controversy that has since taken storm in the news, and I feel like I've seen this every single place. If you guys have seen that, if you guys have seen from the news recently, there was actually a YouTube journalist who his name is Nick Shirley, and he shared a documentary on YouTube basically outlining the issues that are happening in Minneapolis, specifically with the Somali crisis. So I want to give just a little bit of background here, and before I dive in, I do want to say, because I have seen a lot of people comment on Nick Shirley and say, oh, he's not an actual journalist, he's just a YouTuber. And I do want to point out that independent journalism is a very valid thing. And Nick Shirley, for example, to me, is an independent journalist. Whether or not he uncovered something that you personally liked is a different question. But him investigating actual stories is very important because this is something that needed to be investigated. This is something that needed to be uncovered, whether or not you were on the left or the right side. And I hope that you guys will see from today's video that we're going to be talking about two different scams, as I'm calling it, allegedly, from both political parties. Okay, so just to give you guys a little bit of background regarding the Somali controversy or the scam that is happening currently in the news, basically, a lot of these Somali daycare centers, mainly daycare centers, I think also there was like autism slash learning centers that were popping up in Minneapolis, mainly in the Twin Cities, which is Minnesota. But these businesses, when they popped up in Minneapolis, I'm sorry, yeah, Minnesota, they were originated from the COVID funds of 2020. And then my personal theory is that after those COVID funds, or after COVID happened, the childcare centers that used to have children inside of them perhaps did not have children return to them after COVID. So I thought that perhaps these childcare centers perhaps were owned by Somali refugees initially, and it was popular in the community, and then it spread like wildfire. What you will see in this documentary, the one that we actually shared by Rocka News, is that this documentary is highlighting, meant to highlight basically what is going on currently in Minnesota with these childcare centers. So I recommend that you guys check it out if you have the opportunity. But up to date, it looks as though we have a total of 79 people arrested, and 78 of those are currently Somali. And what I was going to say also about the documentary was just that you will note from the documentary that there really is a tight-knit community in Minnesota with this Somali population. I was able to watch another documentary, which I don't have that name off the top of my head, but basically they had shared that there was basically two kinds of migration into Minnesota by the Somali population. So we at first had in the 1990s under the Bush administration that initial Somali group come to the US because they were fleeing from a civil war that was happening in Somalia. And then we had a second flight of individuals come specifically to Minnesota. And those people came, I don't know the exact year, but basically there was a second flight. So there's a really, really high concentration of Somali people in Minnesota, like I said, in the Twin Cities specifically. And I think that it begs a question to ask regarding the local government there. We have Tim Walz, who's currently the sitting governor of Minnesota.
And it begs
And
the
it
question
begs the
just about
question just to better understand what is the government exactly doing to ensure that funds are being used properly. I also think that this is another issue that happens oftentimes when you get these federal programs and that they are just basically being outsourced by the state, or not being outsourced by the state, but the state is mainly just managing billing. It's mainly just managing what are the services that were provided, and they're not really actually verifying the care. There's not actual thought put towards that. But what I do think is very strange about Tim Walz is that the city, or the city did experience a huge deficit in the billions over the course of the past couple of years. And the Walz administration has said that they have been attempting to weed out any kinds of misuse of funds. But it seems odd that there has been such a shift. And actually, in that documentary, there's a person that there's another documentary that came out before this entire controversy that I was looking at, and they had interviewed one of the workers that worked in one of the apartment complexes, and he just like offhandedly said like, "Oh, there just happens to be more daycare centers. Like the city has changed in the past couple of years as the refugee population has basically expanded." And so it's been something that a lot of locals have been attentive to that have seemed somewhat obvious. I was trying to think in my circumstance, like, do I know any businesses or anything like that in like neighborhoods that I've grown up in or live in? And it's like there are some businesses that like obviously like look shady at times, and I feel like everybody can know when there's like, wait, like how's that business in operation? Like nobody's shopped there in like the past 5 months, but for some reason like this business is still in operation. So everybody has their own frame of references in their cities of businesses that just don't look fully right. But I just couldn't think of this as like a massive trend as much as it seemed like it was so obvious actually to the people that lived in the Twin Cities. So I don't know. It's definitely a head scratcher, and I think that everybody it has every right to be concerned regarding where funds are going, especially if this is a taxpayer population. And I also do want to point out that it doesn't seem as though Tim Walz is necessarily making an effort to call it out. In fact, there was a recent speech that he gave. We don't have the clip for it, but there was a recent speech that he gave, and they not a speech. I'm sorry. There was a Q&A or press conference, or I guess they just caught him outside of a building, and we're asking him questions. And the interview asked him um, what he has to say regarding this Somali controversy, the scam, the daycare scam. And Tim Walz goes on this like rampage about it being like a white man, like white men are also doing different things to the city. And while that is true and could be potentially true, it's like we're asking currently about this Somali scam that has, I think up to date, it has been billions of dollars that have been scammed through these businesses, because it has been a multi-year scam that has happened, like I said, since COVID. So people have every right to be upset, especially when in their daily lives they are not necessarily experiencing benefits of like maybe better transportation, better infrastructure, things like that that are going on in the US that are happening to US citizens. And it looks as though there is going to be a backlash by the current DOJ. We have Kash Patel that is weighing in on this. We can see this headline
that
that
says
says
that
that
Kash
Kash
Patel
Patel threatens
threatens Somali
Somali
scammers
scammers
with
with
denaturalization,
denaturalization,
deportation
deportation
over
over
Minnesota
Minnesota
fraud.
fraud,
Tip
tip
of
of
a
a
very
very
large
large
iceberg.
iceberg.
So
So
I
I
do
do
think
think
that
that
this
this
is
is
currently
currently
serving
serving
some.
some purpose with the Trump administration to be able to say, like, hey, this is a Somali population. This is a population that we should go after, because the Trump administration pretty much just benefits from being xenophobic. Like, it's not necessarily intending to give you better reform on like immigration, better reform on like border control, better reform on like fraud, because fraud is happening in probably every single state in the US, including California, which is known for
healthcare fraud or specifically fraud as it pertains to benefits that pertain to like homeless population. So it is not like it is just happening in a vacuum seal, but when it happens, Tim Waltz, we need you to like really step up to it and not just worry about your election cycle. So I get that Cash Patel obviously is having kind of a strong hand in this conversation, but I mean, this is honestly the response that we should be seeing, but we should also be investigating large scale fraud across the board. Which brings me to our next person, which is Ilhan Omar. I'm not claiming that this is a fraudster as much as like the Trump administration is piloting that. By the way, they're saying that she married her brother for like the green card scam. I've not found that to be there. I've not found any evidence of that, and it actually is very easy to pull those records. So I'm entitled to right now believe that that is not true, but it does seem a little bit shady. Ilhan Omar and her husband. Just to give you a little bit of background regarding Ilhan Omar, she is Minnesota's fifth congressional. I'm sorry, she is a representative for Minnesota's fifth congressional district in the House of Representatives. And before she was elected, she served between 2017 to 2019 as in the Minnesota House of Representatives. Uh, yeah, representing part of Minneapolis. Okay, but after she was elected to the House of Representatives or be in the fifth congressional district, she started to see a rise in wealth, or more so her husband and their joint venture. So they have a joint venture called Rose Lake Capital, and that venture is basically just like a VC firm. And they have multiplied their earnings since 2022, which definitely coincides with Ilhan Omar's time in Congress. So, if anybody, when they join a political office, see an increase in wealth, which by the way, it went from like her not having a net worth to $30 million. If anybody sees that, we should be investigating those things as a regular. Okay, well, this shouldn't be like a one case scenario. In fact, there are probably various different, if not almost all of our congressional districts, if not almost all of our politicians that have benefited financially from their political posting, which should not happen because they are political servants. Okay, emphasis on servant because they're meant to serve us. They're not meant to serve themselves. So I think it definitely raises questions. Now, the husband could just be that good at investments, okay? He could just be that good at knowing what to put his money behind. So I'm not saying that that is not a possibility, but it raises questions, and I think it's fair enough to investigate this, okay? Um, that is everything for Ilhan Omar or for the Somali controversy. But if you are enjoying this video, make sure that you're connected with us on our social media. We share clips, updates, and keep the conversation going there too. Your support helps the show grow. All right, back to it. So we are going to shift gears and now talk a little bit about JD Vance. Okay. Now, we're going to be highlighting JD Vance and we're going to be highlighting AI this week because I really wanted to get into like the nitty gritty of what this AI boom is all about. Like, is it worth us losing our minds over, or is it just a bunch of hoopla? And the more I peeled back this onion, and this is like a research process that honestly took me a couple months to start, was the more I peeled back this onion, I realize that the people that are in power are very conveniently in power. They're very conveniently following a trajectory towards that power. And one of those people is JD Vance. Now, I've heard some controversy or some commentary regarding JD Vance's past, his history, all of that. But I have not really heard too many people kind of go into the depths of why he is not a trustable figure, why it seems like he's a phony, why it seems as though he is probably not fit for office, even though he is being groomed allegedly for office. Um, I want to take us all the way back actually through JD Vance's biography because it's actually very important that you understand where he comes from, what he has become famous for, and what is his like rise to power being backed by? Okay, so we're gonna start off in 2016, and this is the year that J.D. Vance released his not his self-titled, his biography,
which
which
was
was
called
called
Hillbilly
Hillbilly
Elegy.
Elegy.
You
You
can
can
see
see
the
the
cover
cover
right
right
there.
there.
Okay,
Okay,
so
so obviously this came out in 2016, so he was working on it before 2016. So this is like a work in progress. But in 2016, JD Vance was not known to anybody, but somehow, by some stroke of luck, this book actually ends up being a New York Times
bestseller. You can
bestseller. You
see
could see
this
this
news
news
article here
article
that
here
says
that says
that
that
Hillbilly
Hillbilly
Elegy
Elegy
is
is
being
being
listed
listed
as
as
a
a
New
New
York
York
Times
Times
bestseller.
bestseller. And actually, funny enough, after it is listed as a New York Times bestseller, JD Vance gets so much press, and he is on Fox News. He's on a bunch of different like public news channels that it's kind of not adding up. Okay. I personally have done social media now for a year and a half, and I have loved the journey of it, but it's a journey to get your name out there, to get your show out there, to get your stuff out there. It's a journey. Okay. You're telling me that JD Vance released a book and so many people, this person that nobody knew about, and so many people bought that book that it became a New York Times bestseller. He just achieved overnight success. That can't happen, JD Vance. Okay, so I want answers as to who purchased that book and what were the deals that were backing it, because that just simply is not very feasible, common sense wise. Okay, and they want us to believe that he is a New York Times bestseller because nobody purchases books these days. Nobody is looking for new releases, and I think it just times really well. Actually, with 2016, because a lot of this press that he was receiving happened around Trump's campaign at that time. So a lot of that, the talking points from the book coincided. And I have actually started to read the book a little bit because I wanted just to kind of get a little bit of an understanding of like JD Vance, how he's positioning himself. And it seems as though he is talking about his background coming from a very rural town and being basically kind of like a hillbilly family where the family is very much like in the know of the community, but they're also very beloved by like the community, and they don't like take any BS from like local politicians, and they're kind of like always at war with whenever there is like injustice happening in their community. So that's kind of the impetus of the book. And then JD Vance allegedly rises out of that very like rural upbringing and then makes his way to the military, which is actually where I want to
Touch
touch
on
on.
oh,
Oh,
later
later
on
on
in
oh,
okay,
okay,
actually
actually
no,
no,
yeah,
yeah,
we
we
can
can
talk
talk
about
about
this
this
military
military
now,
now,
which
which
is
is
basically
basically
just
just
that
that
it
it
seems
seems
as
as
though
though
JD
JD
Vance
Vance had his start really being able to get his way out of combat, which I think is very interesting because oftentimes when you're in the military, I don't know the exact method of enrollment, but when you are fresh out of high school, which JD Vance claims that he was right out of high school going into the military, I don't think you get much pick of where you're going to go. You just get to pick like Navy, military, and Air Force, is my understanding. And then after that, they kind of assign you to different things. But JD Vance got assigned to like a media and journalism effort that was being done by the military. And then he served on that. And then when he ended up going to Iraq with this group, he ended up not actually being in a combative role during that time. But he does definitely use that military background in his benefit, both in his book and then when he's actually talking to the press about his American values, about his traditional upbringing, and all of that. But JD Vance actually has no traditional upbringing outside of maybe just the way that he grew up with his immediate family. Because quickly after he served in the military, JD Vance actually started working. Oh, I'm sorry. After he started working in the military, he then went to law school, but he started working in VC, which is venture capital, immediately after law school. And he ended up working for Peter Thiel. If you guys are not
super
super
familiar
familiar
with
with
Peter
Peter
Thiel.
Thiel,
He's
he's
also
also
jokingly
jokingly
labeled
labeled
as
as
like
like
the
the
Antichrist on a
Antichrist on
lot
a lot
of
of content on the internet. And the reason why he's labeled that way, I think, is because it doesn't seem as though he is someone who values a lot of ethics in his business, but he might care more about profits. And I think there's also a bunch of other like kind of conspiracy-ish things related to Peter Thiel that like you could just go down a rabbit hole for it. But you guys are welcome to do that. And JD Vance started working with Peter Thiel at Mineral Capital, which I'm going to show an image here. You can see Palantir is listed here. We're going to talk a little bit about Palantir in the video, but or actually later on in this week when we talk about AI, when we talk about the military-industrial complex, how that's impacting tech, and how all those are basically being intertwined. And I hope that you're starting to get a picture basically about JD Vance, which is that too many good things are happening. Okay, so he goes and he serves in the military, and he's in the media and journalism branch. Okay, so he's not in a combative role. That's amazing. You know, you get the long end of the stick in life. Cool. You're not actually going out and like being in a combative role. He then goes to Iraq, similar situation, lucky guy. Okay. 2016 rolls around, his book gets released. Okay. Another lucky guy. That thing is immediately a New York Times bestseller. And again, being employed here by Peter Thiel to work for venture capital at Minstrel, that is probably not an easy job to get. If anybody's out here on the marketplace currently and you submit an application, you know that it is hard. In 2013, I'm sure to work at a firm with Peter Thiel was probably a very, very competitive thing to get at the time, I'm sure. And still probably is. I mean, Mineral Capital is still backing, like I said, Palantir and other huge businesses. So it's very possible that's the situation there. Okay, so I want to read to you guys a little bit this excerpt regarding JD Vance after he left Yale Law School. This is from TechCrunch. So it says, after graduating Yale Law School in 2013, Vance moved to San Francisco, where he was a principal at Minstrel, and a fund co-founded by Peter Thiel and AJ Royan. Minstrel raised two funds, a $540 million and a $850 million vehicle in 2013 and 2017, respectively. Thiel was publicly active in politics in 2016, backing Trump's first presidential campaign and helped fund Vance's Senate race, but has said he's not planning to donate to any Republicans in the 2024 election. So, interestingly enough, like I said, JD Vance very conveniently works for Peter Thiel during this time where they form their alliance, is what I'm going to call it, because like you can see here, Peter Thiel is first helping President Trump, then he's helping JD Vance, but then he's like, I'm actually not going to help in 2024 anymore for that election because he doesn't have to, because JD Vance is his guy, that's his guy. So it's like, why is he going to need help? He is the surefire runner-up for president. Well, not runner-up, he's basically coming up right behind Donald Trump and is planning to take that presidency, or at least be considered by the RNC to take that presidency. And then after JD Vance worked for Peter Thiel, he continued his work in venture capital. He ended up working for Steve Case. We could see this post that was actually shared by Steve Case, which says that I'm excited to welcome JD Vance to the Revolution team. He is a perfect person to help us expand Rise of the Rest. This is an old photo of JD Vance that we have here. It's a posting from Facebook, and then also it's a link to that Wall Street Journal article. It says hillbilly elegy author JD Vance moves to Ohio to find venture capital deals. So it seems as though after JD Vance left from working for Steve Case, that their relationship was not necessarily in the best place. From what I was able to locate regarding any commentary by Steve Case on JD Vance was that he said that he hadn't spoken to Vance since he announced last year that he was running for Senate, and I've not supported the campaign. So things did not necessarily go well. I wasn't able to verify it on any particular source, just like hearsay on other podcasters or people who have covered this topic, basically showing that Steve Case didn't have favorable things to say about JD Vance after he left. So that could be the case why he did not support his political campaign, why he hadn't spoken to JD Vance after he was started running for Senate because it was kind of like, I don't really know, I don't really know about this person. And then also too, it seems as though when you really start to peel this onion back, it's like JD Vance wasn't really in the office all that much. So in 2016, it appears that because of the expansion or the promotion of that book, Hillbilly Elegy, he was able to basically kind of skip work for that time period and then promote that book. So he didn't really do too much. We actually have this article by Business Insider that is his colleague describing. We have that front page of that article that his colleague didn't do, that JD Vance didn't do too much. And then we have the excerpt from that article which it says that it never seemed like he was even working, one former coworker told BI. It felt like his full-time job was the book. And then later on it says here that Vance himself acknowledged his lackluster contribution, saying in an interview at that time, how useful I've been on that front is probably debatable. And by the time Vance left the firm, less than a year after he started, I think there was a typo there, coworker said he hadn't closed a single deal. So it seems when he was working for Steve Case, he didn't really have much work. He was probably just like on the payroll while he was also collecting money from Hillbilly Elegy and doing the promotions for that and kind of like ponying up his political campaign that he was going to run. But one thing that I was super surprised to find out that while he was serving, he actually opened up his own VC firm. So he was actually already serving as I believe he was already serving as the vice president at the time that he opened up his VC firm. I could be wrong about that, but it should be right before. But he's already in politics during this time. And he opened this VC firm called Narya Capital. I believe that's how it's pronounced. Funny enough, if you do not want to believe that there is a connection between Peter Thiel, between the tech company, if you don't want to believe that JD Vance has tech handlers, just look at the name of Narya. So apparently Narya actually comes from the J.R.R. Tolkien, one of his books for The Lord of the Ring. And it says here that in the fictional Elvish language of the story, I'm sorry, Narya shares a name of one of the rings of power in the story of The Lord of the Rings. So that's the background behind that. And other companies that have been worked on by Peter Thiel and that orbit are companies like Anduril. And that's what I was saying, where the fictional language of Elvish, it translates to Flame of the West. And also Palantir, which is also backed by Peter Thiel and his VC firm, which we were looking at earlier, I think it's the orbit that's in the Lord of the Rings that they're looking at. So the Lord of the Rings, J.R. Tolkien, it's a trope that's being used over and over by these tech guys to kind of claim not to claim the companies, but basically there's a thematic thing there. I don't know, there's like a negative association with it. I haven't looked fully into. I've only read partially those books, so I can't really comment too much on that. But there's a connection. There's a connection between JD Vance, Peter Thiel, and that background. And it's something that is kind of has been in our faces this entire time. But again, this book, Hillbilly Elegy, is representative of the way that JD Vance is presenting himself to the public and saying, hey, I'm actually just like you guys. I'm a regular guy. I come from a normal background. My mom was addicted to opium, and now I'm just like suddenly this great person that's in politics. But it's not that case. It's like JD Vance has been kind of plucked from all of these things. I don't know about this military service and how coincidental that is regarding him not serving the combative role. I just think that is very, very, very rare for that to happen, I think, especially for someone who has like kind of no political ties, no military ties to kind of get in a role that is non-combative and very specialized like that. And then, like I said, after that to go to law school is normal. It's a common thing for politicians. People want to go in politics. So that's what I'm saying. He's being primed, it seems like, to go to be a politician. He goes to law school and then he works at VC. He meets all these guys, suddenly gets a job there for some reason. And then he serves only for 2 years before he's then pulled in to be a vice president for Donald Trump. And that is a decision that is pretty much backed by Peter Thiel and other voices probably in that Trump administration or that orbit that are voicing to him, hey, elect this guy, put this guy as the vice president. But that's the thing. It's like these people are all so connected, just like how Ilhan Omar. That's why these things like need to always be investigated because it's like, how did you go from a $0 network to a $30 million network, Ilhan Omar? And similar to this Narya Capital, it's like we have Vivek Ramaswamy, who is one of the limited partners of Narya Capital.
JD
JD
Vance
Vance
is
is
no
no
longer
longer
listed
listed
as a
as a
partner.
partner for Narya Capital, but he is still he it does seem as though he is still getting money from that investment. Now he has stated himself that he is no longer listed. So I do want to note that. But I found an article actually that was interesting by Civil Eats, and it outlined that there is this fund or this company
That
that
JD
JD
Vance
Vance
has
has
backed
backed
through
through
his
his
VC
VC
firm,
firm,
but
but
then
then
also
also
is
is
backing
backing
through
through
personal
personal
investment.
investment.
And
And apparently, with this app or this company, you don't actually have to specify, or you don't have to actually specify like the investor name. I think there's a way that the impetus of this app is basically to make it easy to own acreage in US, like basically like US farmland. So in order to do that, they streamline that investing pipeline, and you don't necessarily need like something specific to list your name out. So he could theoretically still be investing through companies like this that he has found through his VC firm. But most likely, what you'll see in politics, similar to like Ilhan Omar's case, which is like, okay, her husband has this VC firm and like I said, he's now done so well for himself and like multiplied his investments every single year. And it's like there's a way that there's an obvious way that this money gets funneled. Then there's like less obvious ways. There's fundraising. There's a bunch of other formats that these politicians get money, but pretty much they're always getting money on the clock, and that's what I have a personal issue with because these people are supposed to be public servants. They're supposed to serve us. Therefore, they should be not necessarily reaping the benefits of being in a political office. It's just like if you worked in an office and a customer gave you a gift, like your office most likely has an HR policy to say, like, do not accept that gift. If they give you a monetary gift, especially, do not receive that gift. So it's like, how are we as regular citizens being held to certain standards, but the people that are serving us are not being held to those standards? And it seems like, hey, we're corrupt, but we're not that corrupt, as Kash Patel said when he said that he was visiting his girlfriend and that he was visiting her shows. He said, I mean, I go to some of her shows, I go to some of her like family events, but I'm not using it like that much. It's like, Kash Patel, are you that much of an idiot? You should not be using it at all because it's taxpayer money. There's no reason for you to fly out to your girlfriend's non sold out show, okay? Cash, I think you can stay home for that one. But back to JD Vance, I think that the thing that is the icing on the cake for me about JD Vance and like, okay, this guy is not who he says that he is. He's just like Sam Altman, which we're gonna get to like later on in this week when we talk about OpenAI and we talk about the background behind that. But
It's
it's
like
like
these
these
guys
guys
are
are
just
just
going
going
to
to
say
say
whatever
whatever
they
they want to get whatever they want as long as they want to. There's actually this interview that was done by one of JD Vance's old classmates when he was in law school. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. This is what she says regarding his changing political opinions.
These issues, of which we've touched on some, from reparations to the police to racism, that this all changed because he had a family, because he became a dad. Do you think that that could be the case?
I mean, I'm not, I don't live in JD Vance's head, obviously, but what I've seen is a chameleon, someone who is able to change their positions and their values depending on what will amass them political power and wealth. And I think that's really unfortunate because it reflects a lack of integrity. This isn't someone who evolved on one or two issues and with new information. This is someone who has changed their opinion on literally every imaginable issue.
So, who is living in JD Vance's head? I think that's the question that we really need to be asking because I don't even think JD Vance is in there, to be honest with you. And Usha Vance, I actually was watching interviews by her. I adore Usha Vance. I'm so sorry that she's getting dragged into this whole thing. She's just like a regular gal, y'all. She's a regular gal. But JD Vance, he's not a regular guy, as much as he wants you guys to believe that he's just some regular, degular old Joe Schmo. And by the way, I am someone who has personally had a lot of fortune in my life, like good things happening. I have not been as lucky as JD Vance. Okay, all the things that are going on in his life are like, boom, next thing, next thing, next thing, next pocket. But hey, who am I to comment? All right, guys, if you guys are enjoying this episode, make sure that you guys are staying connected with us on social media. We share clips and updates and keep the conversation going on there. So your support means the world to us, and we could not do this without you guys. Thank you guys so much, and let's return back to our video. Okay, so like I said, we're going to be touching on the topic of AI. We're going to be touching on the topic of the military-industrial complex, tech, how that business has been growing and basically has been pushing the entire American economy, recent economy, especially California, by the way. I think I just saw a post that California has the fourth largest world economy right behind the United States, which is crazy. But a lot of that comes from Silicon Valley. So let's not forget that. And there really is a new emergence happening here of tech oligarchs. And those are mainly happening in the face of defense contractors. So I did list some in this video, but we have Palantir, which we're going to talk about a little bit later also in this week. And Palantir, as you guys can see here from Mentor Capital's page, it says that it creates transformative data platforms for complex and sensitive environments. Basically, it provides AI software to help with like the U.S. defense. So it was believed that Palantir was used for finding and attacking Osama bin Laden. And it was believed that Palantir is also being used for the IDF for Israel. So this current software is a large data aggregator of like different risk factors, biomarkers, all that information, and it's meant to give the government information on how to attack these like threats to the country. So this is the software that's currently being used, but this is the software that is being backed, like I said, by Peter Thiel. If you guys are not realizing by now, Peter Thiel pretty much is like the president of the United States, pretty much. Then you guys are not paying attention to this episode. Then we have Andrew, which I mentioned to you guys in this episode as well. That was also named after like the Lord of the Rings, basically. But they perform AI-powered weaponry, and we have this article by The Guardian, and actually JD Vance, funny enough, invested in this company while he worked at Mentor Capital with Peter Thiel. So it says that JD Vance's investments reveal potential contradictions with his political persona. Now, the reason why that there is this contradiction is basically what they're trying to state is that JD Vance's VC firm states that they are kind of interested in like middle America, investing in companies that probably don't get that much shine because they're not part of like the very leftist liberal like New York and California. So that's what his firm is doing. And then also JD Vance as a person, he is supposed to represent the little guy. He's supposed to represent the guy from like rural America who just somehow made it because he was just that smart. But JD Vance, you're not just that smart, I think. We have actually an excerpt from that Guardian article. It says here that fantasy aside, Vance's ethics declaration indicates that he has between 1,000 to 15,000 invested in the defense startup, which has raised $3.7 billion in 10 funding rounds to date, according to media reports and startup reporting service Crunchbase. So again, this is just what we know about. But my reason for bringing up these investments is not necessarily that JD Vance is invested in these things financially. Like, okay, $1,000, $15,000, it doesn't mean that much probably to someone like JD Vance, even though it could mean something to somebody else that's out there, and it does mean something for sure. But the point is that JD Vance, Peter Thiel, these defense contractors that are pretty much taking up all of the defense contracts in the US that all of our taxpayer money is going to. Yeah, they're all connected to the same group of people. So an oligarch is when there is a small group of people making decisions for all of us. And it's starting to look like it's JD Vance, Peter Thiel, maybe Sam Altman, which scares me probably the most because we're going to get into him later on. But OpenAI is another one of those tech oligarchs that are rising in the US, and there's a lot of hype around them, but Sam Altman, he's a dark guy, and he's a dark character, okay? If you really get into him, which we will without mercy, we are going to see that come out. And it just scares me. I'm just like, who are you guys? Like, who is Sam Altman? Who is JD Vance? They are allegedly, in my opinion, not the people that they are reporting to be. Okay, so we need to keep a close eye on them, especially as JD Vance is approaching running for president in 2024, coming up right behind Donald Trump. We need to keep a close eye on them. And if nothing else will convince you, I think somebody commented on a previous video of mine, when Erica Kirk endorsed that man, we knew it was not the guy to go with, okay? That only to me is saying red flag, red flag. Israel and Peter Thiel are about to take over the US, allegedly. All right. One last little tidbit that I want to leave you guys on, just to kind of leave the cap on this topic, which is basically that these tech oligarchs are starting to run our country, and we should all be concerned about that, is this documentary that was released by More Perfect Union. And they basically described that there were huge lawsuits that were being done at the end of the Biden administration against Google, against Meta. They go into like various different ones. So I recommend you guys watch the whole documentary if you guys want to look at that. But I want to show you guys a little excerpt from that, which outlines the various lawsuits that were dropped conveniently after these tech CEOs invested in Trump's inaugural fund in 2020. So let's go. I'm sorry, 2024. Let's go with that.
Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was investigating Meta for illegally harvesting users' financial data to sell more ads on their platform. Then, Trump takes office, Meta donates $1 million, and the investigation vanishes. In fact, the Trump administration has basically shut down the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau entirely, which is great for Mark Zuckerberg, but not so much for the entire idea of protecting consumers. Google is playing the same game as Meta. In 2020, the previous Trump administration opened an antitrust case against Google. They said that Google had created an unfair monopoly. Something about running the single biggest search engine and the single biggest web browser at the same time seemed a little unfair, I guess. Google actually lost that case technically, but the judge ruled that Google wouldn't have to change its business in any major way. They could keep the Chrome web browser as long as they paid a measly fine that they could basically dig out of their couch cushions. A lot of people saw it as a major blow to antitrust efforts, and yet, 5 years after he opened the lawsuit, Trump changed course and congratulated the CEO of Google on this favorable ruling.
Do you want to talk about that big day you had yesterday?
I'm glad it's over.
Don't forget, Biden was the one that prosecuted that lawsuit. You know that, right?
Google's stock price, of course, skyrocketed after the ruling.
Now, I want to be clear that I'm not saying that Biden and that administration had their iron fist on these tech oligarchs, but it seems as though this Silicon Valley group has taken over the Republican Party in order to gain power and in order to push their own personal vendetta or advantages, not only in the US, but also in foreign intervention. Like I said, Palantir is allegedly the software that is used to run IDF intelligence in Israel. So these guys are having large spread impact on the world, and they're having a large spread impact on the US, which is obviously important to me because I'm a US citizen and I do not want to see JD Vance and Peter Thiel take over our country. So with that being said, I do want to note, you guys, that we do have a tips inbox. So thank you guys for hanging out with us. If you guys have enjoyed this episode, the best way to support us is by liking, subscribing, following, and sharing with someone who would enjoy this episode. We also have new episodes that stream weekly on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. So we will see you guys in the next episode. If you guys have, like I said, any more information regarding any topics or things that we want to cover, we do have our tips inbox. So please do share with us at therealkevinm.info@gmail.com. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you guys next week.